It started with a photograph, an old faded photo tucked away in a dusty box, buried under decades of memories and heartbreak. A mother, now in her 60s, had taken it out just to calm her nerves, to revisit the last few happy moments she remembered before her world shattered. She hadn't looked at that photo in over 20 years. But this time, something in the background caught her eye. Something she had never noticed before. A car. A very specific car. And in that moment, everything changed. In 1981, a quiet Texas town near the Mexican border became the center of a heartbreaking mystery. 3 identical 6-year-old boys, Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel Marlowe, vanished while playing outside their family home. No screams, no clues, no signs of struggle, just silence. One moment they were there, and the next, they were gone. The disappearance devastated their parents, Evie and Walter Marlowe, and sent ripples through the close-knit community. Everyone knew the boys. Everyone loved them. For weeks, the town came together, combing through every inch of land, knocking on doors, asking questions no one could answer. As the years passed, hope slowly faded. Leads dried up. The story disappeared from headlines, replaced by newer tragedies. But for Evie, a mother who never stopped believing, the search never truly ended. Every face in a crowd, every voice on the radio, every glimpse of a curly-haired boy on a street corner was a trigger, a possibility, something that kept her going. Even after 30 years, it was just another warm afternoon when Evie attended a neighborhood birthday party. Nothing out of the ordinary. Kids running around, cake on paper plates, adults chatting about gardens and local news. But then she saw him. A boy around 8, with dark curly hair and overalls, green checkered ones with yellow straps. Her heart froze. Those were the same clothes her boys were wearing the morning they vanished. Her hands trembled, her breath caught, and without thinking, she reached out and grabbed the boy's shoulder. What followed was chaos, confusion, a father stepping in to protect his scared son, neighbors watching, unsure of what they were seeing, Evie shaking, asking about the boy's clothes, and her husband Walter, trying to gently pull her away. She apologized, said she had mistaken him. But deep down, something had been set in motion. Later that evening, back at home, Evie asked Walter to bring down the box from the attic, the one they hadn't opened in decades. Inside were the remnants of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Toys, drawings, tiny shoes, and the old photo album. They flipped through it together. Birthdays, beach trips, smiles that felt both familiar and impossibly distant. Then they found the photo, the one taken the very morning the boys disappeared. It showed the triplets standing in front of their house, beaming. But in the corner of that frame, just barely visible, was the front of a reddish-brown Cadillac. Lucas had loved that car, obsessed over it. It belonged to their teacher, Mr. Howard Fielding, a man loved by all, respected in the community, and adored by every student he taught. Everyone knew he had moved away before the boys disappeared. That's what they'd all believed. But seeing that Cadillac parked across from their home on the day their sons vanished, that didn't make sense. Was it really his? Could it be a mistake? Evie needed answers. She called an old friend from the school board, someone who might know where Mr. Fielding had gone. The call led her to something unexpected. Not another school, not another district, but a quiet place out in the Texas countryside. A farm. A non-profit charity project for immigrant children. A place called Howard's Haven for Hope. It looked wholesome, honest, noble. A former teacher helping at-risk children build better lives through agriculture and education. But the moment Evie and Walter arrived at the farm, things started to feel strange. The staff was polite but vague. Howard wasn't there. Most of the workers were at a nearby agricultural fair. But then came Ferdinand, a man in his 30s, with the same thick black curls, the same wide smile, and the same thoughtful eyes that Evie had seen 100 times in her dreams. He introduced himself as the activities coordinator, said he had grown up on the farm, that Mr. Fielding rescued him when he was 6. He was kind, respectful. He even showed them the kids' art projects in a brightly colored barn. And that's when Evie saw it. A child's drawing crafted in bright grains of rice, a perfect red Cadillac. "That's Mr. Howard's pride and joy," Ferdinand had said with a smile. "He took it out this morning." Evie's chest tightened. She couldn't shake the feeling. This man, this gentle, articulate man, he looked like her son. He even made art about the car that might have taken him away. Then came the auction. At the fair, the moment they saw Howard again. Older, thinner, but still recognizable. And that's when everything unraveled. Another man appeared. Diego. Same age, same smile, same hair. And when Evie asked about siblings, they said he and Ferdinand were twins, but someone else, a farmhand, let it slip. They were actually triplets. One of them, Marco, lived at a separate estate nearby. That's when it clicked. The Cadillac, the teacher, the rescue, the lies about immigrant children, the missing third brother. Could it be? Could her sons have been taken, renamed, and raised under someone else's control for 3 entire decades? Evie did what any mother would do. She called the police. And now, the answers they've waited 30 years for are just a few miles away. But the truth? The truth might be darker than anyone could have imagined. The road leading back to Howard's haven for hope felt longer this time. Evie sat in the passenger seat, gripping the photo tightly in her hands. The edges were worn, the image faded, but the truth it held had never been clearer. Walter drove, in silence, his jaw clenched, eyes focused on the winding dirt path ahead. They both knew they were no longer chasing shadows. They were following a trail, one that led directly to the truth they'd been denied for 30 long years. At the same time, Detective Martinez and the local sheriff's team were mobilizing. The police were on their way to the farm, armed with search warrants, old case files, and the grim realization that something unthinkable may have happened right under their noses decades ago. Evie's voice trembled as she briefed the detective over the phone, repeating everything they had learned. The drawing of the Cadillac, Ferdinand and Diego's appearance, their ages, the confession from the farmhand about a third brother. Every detail only made the connection stronger and more terrifying. They parked off the road, hidden behind a cluster of trees, far enough from the farmhouse to avoid being seen but close enough to watch. Minutes passed like hours. Then the front door opened and they saw him, Howard Fielding. No longer the friendly teacher from their memories, but a man in a hurry. He wasn't alone. Ferdinand and Diego were with him, helping him carry bags to the trunk of an old red Cadillac. That same car, the one from the photograph, the one that had led them here. Evie felt her chest tighten. Walter reached over and held her hand. "They're leaving," he whispered. She nodded, heart pounding. "We can't let them." But before she could move, red and blue lights appeared on the road behind them. The sheriff's deputies had arrived, blocking the driveway. The scene unfolded, like a movie. Officers surrounded the car. Howard raised his hands, trying to talk his way out. Ferdinand and Diego stepped back, clearly confused and alarmed. They didn't look like criminals. They looked like people caught in the middle of something they didn't understand. Evie couldn't wait any longer. She jumped out of the car, holding the photo high. Walter followed, trying to steady her. "Look at this," she shouted, her voice cutting through the tension. The deputies turned, startled. Howard froze. "These are my sons. They disappeared in 1981, and those 2 men standing right there, they're Lucas and Noah." All eyes shifted to Ferdinand and Diego. The brothers looked at each other, stunned. They stepped forward slowly, their eyes locked on the photo in Evie's shaking hands. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Ferdinand, Lucas, whispered, "That's us. With Marco." His voice cracked on the last word. Diego, Noah, nodded slowly, eyes wide. But he told us we were abandoned, that our parents were in prison. The silence that followed was heavy. Howard tried to speak, but no one listened. The officers moved in, handcuffing him gently but firmly. He didn't fight. He just stared at the ground, jaw tight, eyes hollow. "I did what I had to do," he muttered under his breath. "They were meant to be mine." The words made Evie sick. The detectives searched the farmhouse and found the garage. Inside was the Cadillac, hidden under a dusty tarp. In the drawers of Howard's office, they discovered forged documents, fake identities, and a locked folder filled with carefully preserved school files, including the original enrollment forms for Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel Marlowe. Meanwhile, on a nearby property owned under a separate name, authorities found the third brother, Marco, Gabriel. Still, working with children still under Howard's influence, he had no idea who he really was. When the police brought him to the station later that evening, he walked in cautiously, scanning the room with confusion. When he saw Ferdinand and Diego, his face lit up with relief. But when he saw Evie and Walter, his smile faded, replaced by a look of silent recognition. Evie stepped forward, tears spilling freely. "Gabriel," she whispered, "it's me. I'm your mom." For a moment, no one moved. Then he nodded, slowly, carefully. "I remember your voice," he said quietly, "from a dream I used to have as a kid." His body shook. "But he said you were gone, that we were alone." All three brothers stood together side by side. They were grown men now, strong, capable, intelligent. But in that moment, they were also the lost children of two parents who had spent half their lives searching. Walter reached out, and one by one, the boys stepped into his arms. Detectives worked quickly. Howard Fielding was charged with kidnapping, child abuse, identity fraud, and obstruction. But the full truth was far more complicated. After the death of his own family years earlier, he had fixated on recreating what he'd lost. He never hurt the boys in the obvious ways. They had been fed, clothed, and educated, but emotionally, he'd stripped them of their pasts and given them a false identity, trapping them in a world where their real family didn't exist. Ferdinand, Lucas, had always felt something was off. He never quite believed the stories. Diego had questions too, but Gabriel, he had been kept separate. The more obedient one, the one Howard trusted most. As the truth unfolded, a second, quieter tragedy began to surface. The other children found, on the property, 8 of them, were undocumented immigrants with no living relatives. Howard had taken them in under the guise of charity. Some had been treated well, others had not. Social workers were now involved, helping to place them safely. Evie and Walter faced the hardest part next, trying to rebuild a bond with sons who had lived a different truth for 3 decades. There were awkward silences, long talks, laughter, mixed with tears. The boys had questions, so many questions, and there were no easy answers. In the end, the photo that started it all was framed and placed on their fireplace mantel. The same photo of the 3 boys in green checkered overalls, taken an hour before they disappeared. It was no longer just a memory. It was proof that sometimes, even after the longest storms, light can still break through. But their story wasn't over. Not yet. Because somewhere deep in each of their hearts was the haunting question. If Howard hadn't been stopped that day, would they have ever known the truth? The days that followed were a blur. Journalists swarmed the small Texas town where the Triplets had once vanished. Old neighbors came forward offering support. The headlines read like something out of a movie. Missing Triplets found alive. After 30 years, teacher turned kidnapper, Cadillac photo cracks cold case. But behind all the noise, inside that quiet little house where the Marlowe family had lived all those years, a much slower, more fragile story was unfolding. A family learning how to be a family again. Evie sat at the kitchen table, a worn notebook in front of her. It was the same notebook she had once used to plan the boys' birthday parties. Color-coded schedules, cake flavors, guest lists. Now she used it to write down memories. She wanted to tell them everything. How Lucas used to sleep with his toy fire truck. How Gabriel would hum softly when he colored. How Noah would always cover for his brothers when they got in trouble. She hoped the memories would help fill the missing spaces in their lives, the spaces that Howard Fielding had tried so hard to erase. The triplets, Lucas, Noah, and Gabriel, were adjusting in their own ways. Lucas, the most open of the three, spent hours with his mother looking at photo albums, asking questions, sometimes breaking down. Noah remained quieter, watching everything, absorbing the truth in small doses. Gabriel struggled the most. He had been with Howard the longest, isolated from the others, molded into something that was never truly him. His whole life had been shaped around a lie. One evening, Evie walked out to the front porch and found Gabriel sitting there alone, his face lit by the fading golden light. She sat beside him without saying a word. After a long pause, he whispered, "Why didn't you come for us?" The words cut deep, but Evie didn't flinch. "We did," she said softly. "Every single day. We never stopped looking. But he changed your names. Moved you to a place no one could find, he made sure of it." Gabriel nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "He told me you were bad people, that you gave us away." Evie's hand trembled as she reached for his. "We would have died before giving you away. You were our whole world." Gabriel leaned into her shoulder, and for the first time since the reunion, he cried, not out of confusion but release. Meanwhile, the investigation into Howard Fielding deepened. Detectives uncovered a trail of careful deception. He had built an entire system around false paperwork, shell charities, and a rural network that allowed him to move freely without raising suspicion. What shocked investigators most was that, despite the twisted foundation, many of the programs he had built had helped real children. It was part of what made him so hard to trace. He was doing visible good while hiding an invisible crime. During his court hearing, Howard didn't deny what he had done. He claimed he acted out of love. "They were mine," he said from the witness stand. "I raised them. I gave them a life." But when Lucas stood up to testify, his voice clear and steady, the courtroom fell silent. "You took our names, our past, our parents. You took everything, and then you told us we should be grateful. That's not love, that's control, and it ends today." The judge sentenced Howard Fielding to life in prison without parole. He was 70 by then, and the courtroom knew he'd likely never see freedom again. But for the Marlowe family, it wasn't about punishment, it was about closure. For 3 decades, they had lived in a world without answers. Now they had the truth. Back home, Evie and Walter decided to sell their old house. The memories inside were too heavy, and they needed a fresh start. But before they left, they hosted one final dinner. Just the 5 of them. The same number of plates, the same folded napkins, even the same prayer Walter had whispered before every meal when the boys were little. It felt unfamiliar at first, like playing a role they'd forgotten. But then, halfway through dinner, Noah cracked a quiet joke about Gabriel's burnt toast and everyone laughed. A real laugh. The kind that shakes the room a little and makes your heart ache in the best way. They decided to move closer together, rebuild not only what was lost, but what had never been given the chance to grow. Lucas became involved in child advocacy programs, working with at-risk youth. Noah joined a counseling group, speaking to young people who had been separated from their families. And Gabriel, after months of therapy and support, began painting. His art was vivid, full of color and detail, and for the first time, he created from his own truth, not someone else's. Evie would sometimes sit by the window with a cup of tea, looking out at the world she had once feared would never bring her sons back. But it had, in the most unexpected way. Through a birthday party, a boy's outfit, a photograph, and a mother's instinct that refused to be silenced. So many, Parents never get answers. So many families stay broken forever. But this one, against all odds, was made whole again. It didn't erase the years. It didn't fix everything, but it gave them a future. And sometimes that's all anyone really needs. Because the truth always finds a way, even if it takes 30 years. And for Evie and Walter Marlowe, that truth came home, wearing a wide smile, curly black hair, and a heart still waiting to remember how to love. Now the only question left wasn't where their boys had been. It was how much more they could become, now that they were finally free.